And g'day, Internet and the world. This is Dan Murphy, the editor of Empire Australasia. With me is, of course, David Michael Brown, our senior editor, and we have a very, very special guest this week for Movie of the Week, the producer of The Last Impresario, Nicole O'Donoghue.
Hi.
And so we are talking about The Last Impresario, which is a very, very neat documentary about the life of theatre and film producer Michael Chalky White from the UK, which is directed by Gracie Otto of the quite famous Australian acting clan, the Ottos, Barry and Miranda. And this is her debut directorial...
Yes,
Feature?
Yeah.
And like I say, it's a very, very neat, very fun, very flashy, very star-studded documentary into the life of this extraordinary guy. And we just wanted to ask you first up, Nicole, how did this happen?
Yeah, well, Gracie was at the Cannes Film Festival in 2010, and she, as you are often there, was out at a party at sort of 3 and 4 a.m. And noticed this older, elderly, very refined, well-dressed gentleman sitting in the corner, and she thought he looked really interesting and went over to him, and he offered to buy her a Bloody Mary and asked for a phone number, and after chatting with him for a while, she thought, oh, he sounds interesting, and wrote her number down on a napkin. Didn't expect to hear from him, and got a call the next day and ended up on a yacht with him and Mick Jagger and Lucien Freud and this incredible bunch of people. And she sort of left the festival a few days later thinking, oh, who is this man? And then Greta Scacchi, who's a very good family friend of the Ottos, knew Michael and gave Gracie his biography called Empty Seats. And so Gracie sort of began researching and realised that he had a lot of interesting friends and had been involved in so many sort of key productions. She sort of started thinking about making a documentary about him.
Yeah. I was going to say, was he pretty much responsive straight away, or did it take some persuading?
No, not at all. I think it took him a while, probably 9 months, to sort of really take her seriously. She sort of, after Cannes, went to London and said, I want to make a film about you, and he was like, no. And so she left, and then 6 months later saw that someone called her and said, oh, Michael's selling his collection of memorabilia at Sotheby's. And Gracie at the time was in LA working as an assistant editor, and she thought, well, if I am going to make a film about him, then it needs to have this scene of the Sotheby's. He sort of was selling his memorabilia because he was low on cash at that point, and so she sort of, on her frequent flyer points, jumped on a plane and flew to London, and he allowed her to film. And then realised, I think, that she was quite serious about it. And I guess over the next sort of year, she just would go and film observational scenes with him. And then kind of, discovered that he also had this incredible archive of sort of 30,000 photographs.
Right, so that happened after she'd started filming.
That was sort of revealed.
That must have been a very good moment.
If you haven't seen the film, folks, Michael has he's been a theatre impresario since the 50s.
Yeah.
And right through swinging 60s London, and put on shows such as O Calcutta, which is pretty nudie-rooty even for the 60s, and the original of the Rocky Horror Show, which became the world-beating Rocky Horror Picture Show. Amongst a whole bunch of other stuff, he made films of Monty Python. Which was it?
He produced the Holy Grail.
Holy Grail, that's right.
Yep.
Yeah. So a very groovy guy, and was an amateur photographer who took photos of everybody.
Yeah, he sort of every time he went out, he would sort of take one of those old sort of disposable film cameras. Yeah. So he has just documented sort of 30 years of behind the scenes of very candid shots of his friends, very famous friends. So
I would say, as documentary filmmakers, finding that, it's like it must have been your holy
grail
of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, and sort of then I guess I came on board maybe sort of 2 years after Gracie had met him, and I think she thought she might just make a short film, and then sort of showed me the archive that she had and the footage that she'd already shot with him in London and LA, and I sort of, being a feature producer, sort of went, actually I think there's, let's try and go for a feature, and got an editor on board, and we sort of just worked on the story in the edit, really.
So Rocky Horror was kind of the beginning of the end financially for him, because he lost the rights for the film, for the film version of it, despite having stumped up everything for the theatre show. And getting the film thing operated. He was kind of out negotiated by a hard-nosed American producer, Lou Adler.
Yeah.
And you interviewed Adler, and he kind of felt a bit felt a bit uncomfortable with that. How did that sort of pan out?
Yeah, like I think, without doing a spoiler alert for the film, because it's sort of a really key moment, Michael had, I think part of Michael's attraction to putting shows on was sort of the fun and the party afterwards. And Richard O'Brien from the Rocky Horror Picture Show talks about how that moment in Michael's life where sort of he thinks that Michael chose to sort of follow the primrose path as opposed to be a serious businessman.
Yeah, right.
And so, yes, we tell the story, and Lou Adler, the American producer of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the film, kind of tells the story himself, and Michael finds it difficult to talk about, and obviously it was sort of a turning point in his career. Yeah.
Hey, we've got a clip for that too. Let's have a look at this. Is from the actual documentary, The Last Impresario. Let's have a check.
Michael, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Michael, my friend Gina. Gina, this is Michael.
Michael's been going to that festival for I don't know how many years, and I think, he likes people. He's interested in people. I've met the most extraordinary people with Michael. One minute he's hanging out in some grungy bar, then he's dining with Thatcher.
It seemed to me that I always knew Michael. Michael was one of those extraordinary people that just seemed to know everybody on the planet. And Michael just liked being where the action was. That's when he came alive, when you felt that he was at the center of all these different worlds.
I was in New York, and I think I was about 19 or 20. I just met Christy and Naomi, and it was all really exciting for me. And I don't know, one night I ended up just hanging out with Chalky and going on and on, like, let's go to another club, let's go to another... And he was the only one that could really keep up with me.
The photography happened over a course of a couple of years, was it? Or
I guess,
off,
the Sotheby's shoot was sort of at the end of 2010, and then the last interviews that we shot were probably sort of May 2013.
Yeah, right.
So we would sort of get into the edit suite and work with what we had, and then realise that, for that Monty Python section, we're really going to need John Cleese.
Yeah.
And I guess it was also all about, everyone's schedules. So trying to sort of pin Yoko Ono down, who's also in the film because Michael put her first show on in London in the late 60s. So, yeah, sort of...
So he broke up the Beatles.
Well, there's a scene in the film where Michael sort of, boasts about the fact that he had this little office on Duke Street in London, and that just across the hallway was where Yoko and John sort of had an apartment as well.
Yeah,
so
right.
He was definitely at the centre of all of that.
Well,
singing 60s.
He was obviously someone who's got a lot of friends, and everyone keeps saying what a wonderful guy he is. And the big thing of his life now is really all the friends he's still got.
Yeah.
And so I assume most people you went to
said yes.
said yes. Was there anyone out there who went, oh no?
Yeah, I think what we keep talking about sort of at the moment in speaking to people about the film now is that the one interview that the fish that got away really was Jack Nicholson. He's a very close friend of Michael's, and Gracie he was one of the first people that Gracie really met with Michael in LA, and she tells a story of sort of Michael saying, we're going to a friend's for dinner, and then they sort of arrived at the house and Jack Nicholson opened the door with a Rocky Horror t-shirt on, and Gracie's like, oh my God, I can't believe you didn't let me bring my camera. And but she was so kind of bowled over by the fact that it was Jack Nicholson and there's Picasso's hanging on the wall of his lounge room that she didn't even mention the film. And then we sort of did try and pursue that interview, but we never really landed it. And I guess with the doco, it's sort of like it has to end at some point. Like we could have just gone on for years, but...
Do you think the fact that Gracie is an Australian and that helped her cause him... I mean, he seems to meet people from all walks of life and they love him. He struck me as kind of an elliptical character, especially now. He's had a series of a couple of strokes. And did he have one through the course of the making of it? Because he seemed to go from one stick to two through the film's narrative.
He wasn't really ill while we were, over the years that we were making it.
Right.
He'd sort of had the first strokes in the late 90s. But his speech and mobility definitely deteriorated while Gracie was filming. And then we launched the film, a version of the film at the London Film Festival in October.
Yeah.
And he was blown away and loved it. But then he got quite ill this year, had another stroke in LA in February. And was quite unwell, and Gracie flew over, and we were thinking, oh, this is the end. But then he seemed to start recovering, and then he also just received a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Olivier Awards in April.
Yeah.
So suddenly he was sort of back on track and on a flight back to London kind of 6 weeks after the stroke.
He's
So
indefatigable, yeah.
He is, yeah. He's a cat with 9 lives.
Where I was going with it is that because he had a lot to do with Australians who were, he was with an Australian woman whose name I forget.
Lyndall Hobbs.
That's right, Lyndall
Yeah.
Hobbs. That's right.
Yeah.
For several years,
Yeah.
and was surrounded by Australians. And at one stage, because like I say, he's quite an elliptical character, and I think, despite giving it the good old college try, Gracie, with blunt questions, can't seem to really nail the heart of him. You know what I mean? She really goes for it.
Yeah.
But he's sort of slippery and sort of revealing his true self.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of, I think it's kind of what makes the film sort of fascinating, because you kind of come away from it, and so many people have spoken about him, including his family and children. But you still there's still a mystery behind the man.
There's another layer you just don't quite get.
Yeah, which I think is part of his sort of appeal and what kind of made him so interesting to a lot of people.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, look, it's like I say, it's a very, very tidy documentary. We really enjoyed it. I really, really urge everybody to go see it. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Our first, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, our first proper talent interview here at Empire HQ or the Imperial Palace. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Thanks.